Hi, this is Starkey Sowers. Welcome again to another Plus Program training series. Today's topic, milk and milk substitutes, and this is part 2. In part 1, we went extensively through all different types of milk and milk products, and the focus on this particular segment is going to actually be on milk substitutes. All right, so you can't think about milk substitutes without a little bit of a history, so let's look at the history, so to speak, about milk substitutes. And ultimately, one thing that we know is this. Soy probably has led the generations of milk substitutes for years. So a little history on soy probably wouldn't hurt. So when we look at soybeans, actually for over 2,000 years, the Chinese actually called it their meat or meat substitute, oftentimes classified as a great source of protein. So we'll see that soy actually kind of generated its own little revolution, so to speak, throughout the Orient. We see Japanese individuals starting to consume it, as well as much of the Orient using soy in a large production facility, all the way from not only milk to powders, misos, tofu, and things of that nature. It is noted, though, that 50% of all the soy that's made in the world is actually made in the United States. So our consumption of soy is relatively high. The other thing that we can't do is we can't credit anybody other than Dr. Jethro Kloss, who wrote the book Back to Eden. So when we noted that he, along with Will Kellogg, did a lot of research when it came to alternative milk and milk substitutes, and he was actually producing some soy milk back in the 1940s. And so he actually had in his book a recipe on how to make soy milk alternative milk, quote unquote, and use it throughout the day, and kind of some formulas that would use it in all sorts of different applications. So definitely got to give credit where credit is due. So one thing we know is he kind of led that generation of alternatives. All right, so that kind of gives us a little bit of history about it. One of the number one reasons that we're going to see for this use is going to be two things. Number one, as we were saying, food sensitivities. Number one, such as allergies. Individuals have a tendency to be real commonly allergic to certain types of proteins that are milk, such as caseins as well as wheys. Another thing that we notice is this. Individuals that also what we have call as milk sensitivities. Mind you, there's a very strong difference. You could have a milk sensitivity, but not have a milk allergy. A milk sensitivity means that either lactose, you're not digesting it properly, or just the whole gamut of everything that is in milk just doesn't seem to settle well with your system. Finally, another reason why individuals will have a tendency to use a milk substitute is taste. One thing that we notice about the taste is the taste of milk. Sometimes people don't really particularly care for it. So they'll have a tendency to say, well, I want to use something else in place of it. And ultimately, the milk substitutes have done a great job as far as filling that gap, so to speak. All right. So as we were saying, soy is probably the number one milk substitute that's been used for years, ultimately kind of laying the foundation of that. But what about the recent things such as nuts and seeds and things of that nature? So when we look at that, we have to credit Dr. Pablo Arriola. So Dr. Pablo Arriola wrote a book back in the 60s and 70s. He said, "Are you confused?" And so one of the things that he did, along with Dr. Christopher, is propose the idea of individuals that were milk sensitive to use nut milks, or maybe use like different types of grains as a flour, so to speak, that was like a flour milk. And so he was probably one of the number one guys that actually proponed the use of almond milk, as well as cashews and other different types of nuts. And he had like formulas that were mixed with lecithin and other different types of components, and that you actually use some thickening agents and kind of produce that milk alternative. All right, so definitely credit him along the way as being the guy who probably originated the use of nuts and seeds, making that alternative milk situation as well. So then what I want to do is I want to look at all the different types of milk substitutes that we've got on the market and maybe have a comparative analysis. So looking at this comparative analysis, a couple things to note coming into these. First of all, if it's an unsweetened milk substitute, it's typically going to be very low in calories. So for that reason, a lot of individuals like using it on a regular basis for something to drink. And so what does it mean that it's going to be low in calories? Well, if it's low in calories, it also means that it's going to be low in nutrients. It's typically going to be low in protein. It's typically going to be low in carbohydrates. And for the most part, most all the nuts and seeds categories are going to have an appreciable amount of good fats. So that's a benefit to it. In addition, what we notice is this. A lot of these particular milk substitutes have to use a thickening agent, because if you don't use a thickening agent, a lot of these components have a tendency to fall to the ground. You have to reshake them and consume them. By the way, there are certain ones that are out there that don't have thickening agents, and typically will tell you that you want to shake them well before consuming them. All right, so a couple things. Number one, they're also going to have added sweeteners. So added sweeteners, anywhere from like 6 to maybe 30 grams of added sweeteners. So the other thing is low in nutrients and typically low in proteins and typically decent in fats. So let's break these down category by category. First thing we'll do is we'll look at the nuts and seeds. So we're looking at almonds, we look at cashews, we look at hazelnuts. A couple significant things. The fatty acid profiles are great. They're rich in poly and monounsaturated fats. They're typically very low in protein. So with that said, if they're low in protein, it's really not a protein product. So it's not going to be like milk. Soy is going to be the exception on this list. So you definitely want to remember that. So kind of similar categories that you're going to see when we get into the grain products. So when we get into the rice, as well as when we get into the oats, those are going to be, once again, typically lower in protein. Oats going to be the highest of those two in proteins. Ultimately, once again, same thing. Great fatty acid profiles, a few other different things. All of these, by the way, typically have added nutrients to it. So they're going to have added calcium, maybe some vitamin A, vitamin D, as well as some B vitamins, maybe vitamin E. All right. So last on this particular category list is what I call the seed group. So we're looking at flax and we're looking at hemp, looking at flax and hemp. This probably has the greatest benefit for omega-3 fatty acids. So if you're an individual like me that's a little bit on the milk sensitive side, unless I'm drinking yogurts or kefirs, I typically will use a hemp milk because it's loaded with all sorts of good omega-3 fatty acids. So this is my milk alternative choice, so to speak. So finally, last on the list is soy. And so when we look at soy, we know a couple different things. It's probably the most similar to cow's milk, making it super popular for choice for so many years. A couple negative press things about soy throughout the years has indicated possibly that soy might be linked to certain types of cancers. And it seems like the battle in that goes back and forth. Positives, negatives, positive, negatives. I think the argument is going to be out of text, so to speak, for a period of time before we have a solid answer. At this point, most experts agree that 4 to 5 servings of soy throughout the week seems to be of great benefit, regardless whether we have those sensitivities to possible cancer links or not. All right, so that kind of wraps everything up, kind of gives you a little idea of what's on the shelf, gives you a little idea of alternative milk substitutes. This is Starkey Sowers. Thanks again for watching another Plus Program training series.